this guy's garage. Like and subscribe.
Oral questions. Questions orales. The Honourable for Sturgeon River Parkland.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The Liberals' cap on Canada's prosperity is a threat to the livelihood of all Canadians. All Canadians benefit from the support of our oil and gas sector in terms of jobs, investment, royalties, taxes, and perhaps most importantly, our dollar. This production cap will mean fewer jobs, less investment, less taxes to fund hospitals and schools, and higher inflation on everything as our dollar collapses against the U.S. Meanwhile, more jobs for American energy and steelworkers. Will this Liberal government finally put aside its obsession with grinding our energy sector down, unleash Canada's energy superpower, and scrap the cap?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Environment and Climate Change.
Thanks, Madam Speaker. Let's stick to the facts. Canada's overall emissions are the lowest that they've been since 1997. That's the year that Connor McDavid was born, and they're going down thanks to climate action undertaken by this Liberal government. The Alberta oil sands are by far the largest source of greenhouse gas emissions in Canada, and the Conservatives want to turn a blind eye to unlimited pollution in the oil sands. Madam Speaker, Alberta's far-right Premier Danielle Smith has spent $7 million on a misinformation campaign here in Ottawa to make polluting free again. That's $7 million that could have hired new teachers, new nurses, new doctors, but instead she's shilling for big oil and gas, and these Conservatives are helping her do it.
Good answer. Good answer.
The Honourable Member for Sturgeon River Parkland.
Well, Madam Speaker, speaking of misinformation from this Liberals, the Environment Commissioner confirmed that this Liberal government is not on track to meet its own emissions reduction targets. Canadians are paying the cost of this Liberal government's carbon tax, and it's all pain and no gain. Under the Conservative, Canada's economy grew, and emissions actually went down. But under these Liberals, Canada's GDP per capita is collapsing under the weight of tax hikes. The Liberals' real plan to hit their emissions targets is to collapse our economy and move more jobs south of the border. When will they have the courage to finally admit it and let Canadians decide in a carbon tax election?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Madam Speaker, that is not true. Under the Harper government, pollution went up and up and up. In million metric tons of greenhouse gas emissions, 716, 721, 738, 753. Madam Speaker, under this government, we've brought them down under 750 million metric tons after it was rising under the Harper government to an average of under 700 million metric tons over the past 3 years. Under Conservative government, emissions were projected to be 41% higher by 2030. Conservatives want to abandon our climate commitments to future generations and make polluting free again, and that's not okay.
The Honourable Member for Sturgeon River Parkland.
Well, Madam Speaker, I'll tell you what's not okay. The Salvation Army released yet another devastating report on rising food costs. The Liberals' tax and spend policies are driving up costs for farmers who grow the food, truckers who ship the food, and sadly, for families who eat the food. With malnutrition on the rise and scurvy making a comeback, it's no wonder that Canadians are dissatisfied with the menu of higher taxes and inflationary spending offered by these Liberals. It's time to axe the tax so Canadians can afford to eat, and get themselves to work. When will this NDP Liberal government let Canadians decide in a carbon tax election?
L'honorable secrétaire parlementaire, ministre des Familles, des Enfants et du Développement social.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. We know that we are going through expensive times. This is exactly why we've made investment like the Canada Child Benefit. This means that we send parents over $7,000 per year to help with the cost of raising kids. Parents, when the Conservative leader talks about cuts, he's saying that it will cut these checks and make your family worse off. Is this what families need? No, I don't think so. We fight for Canadians, and we are there when times are tough.
The Honourable Member for St. Albert Edmonton.
Madam Speaker, the Minister of Employment is embroiled in allegations of conflict and fraud. And yesterday it was revealed that the minister falsely represented that his business is wholly Indigenous owned in an effort to secure millions of dollars in federal contracts. This is disgusting cultural appropriation and outright fraud. So in the face of that, why is he still in cabinet?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Indigenous Services.
Madam Speaker, once again, the company has never been listed on the Indigenous Business Directory, has never received a contract without procurement strategy for Indigenous businesses that's meant to uplift Indigenous entrepreneurs. Our focus is building up Indigenous businesses through this procurement program, and it's all about economic reconciliation.
Order, order. The honourable member for St. Albert, Edmonton.
Madam Speaker, the point is that the minister lied. Let's look at the facts. The minister tried to scam taxpayers by stealing millions of dollars in government contracts from legitimately owned Indigenous businesses. The minister is a fraud. He is a disgrace. He needs to go, and he needs to go now. Why was the Prime Minister fired?
The honourable member knows full well that quite a few of the words that he used were not acceptable when addressing Parliament. So I would just ask members to please refrain from using those words to attack individuals. The honourable member for the Honourable Parliamentary Secretary for the Minister of Indigenous Services.
Madam Speaker, once again, the company was never listed on the Indigenous Business Directory and never received a contract. But while we're talking about Indigenous Business Directory, I'd like to highlight that since we announced that 5% target, we've seen a surge in Indigenous entrepreneurs' interest and investment in that program. Conservatives were aimless. They didn't set targets and it showed. Only 1% of contracts were going towards Indigenous businesses. The Conservatives' hidden agenda here is obvious, Madam Speaker, and on this issue, they're being disingenuous.
After 9 years, the NDP Liberals are not worth the cost to Canada. The worst decline in living standards in 4 decades, the worst drop in income per person in the G7, the worst economic growth in the OECD. What's their wacko plan now? Slap a job-killing oil and gas cap on Canada, make everything even more expensive, and drive out jobs, businesses, money, tech, and talent. Over 450 billion Canadian dollars have fled Canada, fled them to the U.S. When will the Liberals stop fueling the U.S. and help Canadians instead?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Environment and Climate Change.
Thanks very much, Madam Speaker. Let's talk about GDP per capita over time in Canada. Between 2006 and 2016, Canada's GDP per capita under Harper grew from $40,504 to $42,134. It's about $1,800 over 10 years. Under this Liberal government, it's grown from $42,000 a year to $53,372 in 2023. That's by more than $11,000. So Conservatives, you don't need to pull out your calculators. $11,000 is more than $1,800.
The honourable member for Lakeland.
Keep telling Canadians they've never had it so good. The truth is these NDP Liberals hurt Canadians every time, but help the U.S. and hostile regimes. It's nuts since so many countries want Canada's energy. Ukraine, Germany, Poland, Japan, South Korea, Greece, and Latvia all ask for LNG, but these NDP Liberals say no. 1 million Canadians need powerful paychecks from oil and gas jobs, but 9 years of killed pipelines, energy tax hikes, and oil and gas cap sends jobs and monies to the U.S., Canada's top ally and competitor. Why do the NDP Liberals send Canada's jobs to the U.S. and make Canadian workers suffer?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. We're working on the challenges that Canadians face with real solutions. At that time, inflation is down, interest rates are down, unemployment rates are down, and greenhouse gas pollution rates are down as well. And despite what these climate change denying Conservatives say, CO2 isn't plant food. That absurd Conservative claim that reducing our carbon emissions would somehow be bad for crop growth is straight up anti-science, disinformation, and climate denialism. Carbon dioxide is a greenhouse gas. We learned that in elementary school. The oil sands are Canada's largest source of industrial carbon emissions, and our pollution cap asks them to invest some of their astonishing $60 billion in profits in innovating and making sure that Canadians can afford green, affordable.
The honourable member Calgary Centre.
After 9 years, this NDP Liberal government has shown again they are not worth the cost. This week, the government announced a new policy, a cap on the Canadian economy. Since 2015, the United States has increased oil and gas production by 40%, much more than Canada. The world needs Canadian oil and gas. With the incoming U.S. administration promising to unleash American energy, this government has announced a cap on the economy, costing Canada 150,000 jobs. How can they justify this economic vandalism?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Transport.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The pollution cap will ensure our energy sector can increase its production while decreasing its emissions. Countries around the world are looking at Canada for less polluting energy. If we want our energy to stay competitive, we must lower our emissions. The pollution cap will provide long-term competitiveness in Canadian energy, so we can keep being an energy superpower for the world. Under the do-nothing approach that the previous Conservative government approached, Canada's imports of foreign oil were 2 times higher. They failed to promote Canadian energy. Madam Speaker, I would be happy to offer the Conservative leader and his party a briefing on this climate change.
The honourable member Calgary Centre.
Well, let me quote Canada's destructive environment minister. Look around the world. No other oil and gas producer is doing what we're doing. And one could wonder why. Or why he ignored the warnings of the economic destruction his Canadian energy cap would cause when it offers no environmental benefit. Any reduction in Canada will automatically be met by other producers around the world. The minister's announcement is nothing but performative. Will the Prime Minister get serious about actual solutions and fire this environment minister?
Yeah! L'honorable secrétaire parlementaire.
Madam Speaker, it's no wonder that the Conservatives aren't talking about the economy today. It's because yesterday Statistics Canada raised their numbers. In fact, they revised growth in Canada upwards. And you know why? Madam Speaker, it's because business investment is streaming into Canada. Investors are looking to Canada because we offer stability and certainty, and that's translating into growth and into higher paychecks for Canadians.
The honourable for Northumberland, Peterborough South.
Madam Speaker, the Prime Minister was so excited about the new U.S. President that he sent him a gift. Thousands of Canadian jobs, millions of Canadian investment dollars. This Liberal government's carbon tax and failure to stand up for Canada has created an exodus of capital from Canada to the United States. This Prime Minister's policy has created a made-in-Canada per capita Canada GDP recession. While American workers are thriving, Canadians can barely afford food and rent. Will this Prime Minister stop sabotaging the Canadian economies and axe this self-imposed tariff?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Innovation, Science and Industry.
Conservatives seem so intent, Madam Speaker, on talking down the Canadian economy. They don't seem to be able to recognize the positive signs of economic progress and recovery. Inflation is down to 1.6% in Canada. Our central bank has decreased interest rates 4 times. We've attracted over $50 billion in foreign direct investment, propelling us to #1 per capita in the G20. That's led to tens of thousands of good-paying jobs in this country. Jobs that are projected to grow in the clean economy to over 400,000 by 2030. Those are real opportunities that pay the bills, unlike Conservative cuts.
The honourable member for Northumberland, Peterborough South.
Madam Speaker, these Liberals keep telling Canadians at food banks they've never had it so good. Well, here's the facts. The Economist magazine says that Canada is now poorer than Alabama, the 4th poorest state in the United States. Further, over the past 5 years, America's economic growth has outstripped Canada's by nearly double. Simple question. When will Canadians get an opportunity to vote for common sense Conservatives so that we can turn their hurt into hope and restore the promise of Canada?
The Honourable Government House Leader.
Madam Speaker, we responded to the needs of Canadians. That's why we brought in programs like the Canada Child Benefit, because we know that Canadian families need extra help right now. But what did the Conservatives do, Madam Speaker? They said, don't send those checks to Canadians. They said, cut those programs, Madam Speaker. When they talk about their crocodile tears for Canadians, they're not actually doing anything to help. Madam Speaker, we know Canadians are struggling, and that's why we've responded with programs that actually help them. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Grande Prairie Mackenzie.
Madam Speaker, last year the Liberals imposed a ban on military chaplains from reciting prayers at Remembrance Day. Chaplains, veterans and Canadians immediately fought back and the government relented, well, for a year. But the directive is back. These Liberals are imposing their ideological ban yet again. Remembrance Day is a time for reflection and healing and hope. And for many veterans, praying is part of that journey. Will the government end its attack on the vocation of chaplains and allow them the freedom to pray?
L'honorable secrétaire parlementaire du ministre de la Défense nationale.
Madam Speaker, I want to take this opportunity first to thank our members and our veterans for their service and their sacrifice. But let's be absolutely clear. The Chaplain General issued this directive independently, and it does not ban prayer. Actually, the directive simply seeks to help our CAF chaplains make their public addresses more inclusive to reflect the spiritual diversity of Canadians and our CAF members, Madam President.
L'honorable député de Grande Prairie Mackenzie.
After relenting last year, Madam Speaker, the Liberal Minister of Defence promised, and I quote, chaplains are not and will not be banned from prayer on Remembrance Day, but that isn't true. They've now issued an even more draconian order saying that chaplains will be monitored and disciplinary measures will be imposed on those who say the word God or those who pray.
Shame.
This censorship is unthinkable. Will the government finally relent, end their attack on the work of chaplains, and allow them the freedom to pray?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Madame la Présidente, je prends...
Madam Speaker, let me just once again take the opportunity to thank the members of the Armed Forces.
St. Albert Edmonton to please calm down and to please wait. If he's not being recognized, he should not be speaking. L'honorable secrétaire.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary can start over, please. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Let me just take the opportunity once more to thank members of the Armed Forces and our veterans. I'd like to thank them for their service and their sacrifice.
Absolutely not true what this member is saying or alleging, and I feel this ashamed that they are proclaiming this. As we said, we have not banned prayer. We are looking out to reflect the diversity of our CAF, and this is a directive that comes from the Chaplain General. Merci, Madame la Présidente.
The honourable member, order. I'm sure that the honourable members want to hear their own member's question. The honourable member for Durham.
Madam Speaker, after 9 years, the Prime Minister has doubled the cost of housing and put an entire generation of Canadians through housing hell.
Right.
But who does he have any empathy for? His buddy from Bell Media, Tom Clark. The Prime Minister used $9 million of taxpayer money to purchase a luxury condo for Tom Clark in Manhattan, in a neighborhood called Billionaires Row. When will the NDP Liberals finally stop the abuse of taxpayer dollars and fire Tom Clark?
Yeah. The Honourable Minister of Housing, Infrastructure and Communities.
While the Conservative members of Parliament are focused on distractions, we're focused on delivering housing for Canadians who live in this country. Madam Speaker, we are currently in a debate with the Conservatives based on their big commitment to cut billions of dollars from housing directly to communities right across this country. We know on this side of the House that it takes investments to build housing so we can make it easier to build. We can make housing more affordable. What is the Conservative solution? Cut, cut, cut. Madam Speaker, we have a long history of Conservative cuts to housing. It's part of the reason we're facing a housing crisis today. We will make the investments necessary to deliver affordability to Canadians.
Just want to remind members to please settle down a little bit, because I'm sure that the honourable member who's going to do a follow-up question wanted to hear the answer properly so that he can ask his question properly. The honourable member for Durham.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I did hear the Liberal minister's answer, and I do feel bad for the Liberal minister, because he's out here selling a generation that he is part of, a bunch of policies from the Prime Minister that have failed our time. They have failed our people, and he's got a tough job ahead of him to even rationalize what is going on in this government. But let's be very clear. Tom Clark, the Prime Minister's buddy from Bell Media, said that the housing he had in Manhattan required immediate replacement. This government then went on to spend $9 million of taxpayer money to get him a condo in Billionaires Row. When will they stop abusing the tax?
The Honourable Minister. The Honourable Secretary of Foreign Affairs.
I hope I get equal time to answer that ridiculous question. In light of what has gone on this last week, Canadians are worried about our economy, we're worried about our relationship, and there's no time like the present to have a strong presence in the United States of America. Our representatives will be working extremely hard to protect Canadians' interests, Canadians' jobs, every day. It's the cost of doing business, and we will do it well. We will represent Canadians' interests in New York City, the largest city in the United States of America. We will be there to ensure that Canada's interests are protected. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The honourable member for Haliburton, Kawartha Lakes Brock.
Speaker, after 9 years, the NDP Liberals are not worth the cost or the corruption. Yesterday, we learned that Global Health Imports, a company co-owned by the Employment Minister, bid on federal contracts while claiming to be wholly Indigenous owned. However, the minister has so far refused to present documents supporting his company's statement. No wonder GHI has at least 8 criminal court cases against them. Will the minister produce the documents or admit he lied and resign?
Yeah. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Public Services and Procurement.
Madam Speaker, the company in question has never received contracts as an Indigenous business and has never been listed on the Indigenous Business Directory. However, unlike the Conservatives, we will continue to work and partner with Indigenous people so that they have economic reconciliation. Madam Speaker.
A member for Haliburton, Kawartha Lakes Brock.
Speaker, the point is that the Employment Minister's company that he co-owned checked the box claiming to be Indigenous owned. And if true, that's fraud. That's the point of this whole thing. It's amazing. And not only that, they circumvent the regular procurement process. The Liberals have no shame, Speaker. They would rather push down Indigenous-owned businesses in order to secure contracts and enrich themselves. So, if the minister will not produce the documents or answer any questions, will the Prime Minister do the right thing? Fire him.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Madam Speaker, let me reiterate. The company in question never received a contract for as an Indigenous business. The company was never on the Indigenous Business Directory, and we continue to work very closely with Indigenous partners to ensure their success. And we'll do so even without the Conservatives who are blocking and obstructing the very necessity of working closely with Indigenous people so that they too can succeed, and we will continue to do so.
Madam Speaker, what's funny is that the worse the scandal, the quieter the House Leader speaks.
Yes.
After 9 years, we have another scam in the Arrive scam scandal. We have 3 new cases of fraudulent billing that has been sent to the RCMP. Madam Speaker, this is now a total of 7 cases that have been sent to the RCMP of fraudulent billing. Canadian taxpayers have been scammed a total of $5 million in this Arrive scam scandal fraudulent billing. So why is this government always intent on giving money to fraudsters and scamsters while Canadians are lined up at food banks?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Madam Speaker, I appreciate the concerns that we all have, ensuring that we can maintain transparency and we have adequate procurement processes in place, which we do. And we have initiated a number of practices, and we've worked closely with the Auditor General and the Procurement Officer to ensure that all of the processes are adhered to. And I recognize the member opposite is always looking for clips on her YouTube hit, but Madam Speaker, we're working for Canadians, not for herself.
The Honourable Member for Haldimand, Norfolk.
After 9 years, these NDP Liberals are not worth the cost or the corruption. Remember the Arrive Can scandal? An app that should have cost $80,000 that ended up costing the taxpayers $50 million? Well, it gets worse than that. Now there are 3 more cases being referred to the RCMP for fraudulent billing practices. When will this government admit that they've allowed millions of dollars to be siphoned off in fraudulent contracts to enrich their Liberal buddies?
Good question.
Well done. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Madam Speaker, let's be clear. It is completely unacceptable that there are any fraudulent billings. It's completely unacceptable that anyone out in the public tries to abuse the system of working with government. That is why we have taken the necessary steps to protect Canadians and taxpayers by putting proper processes in place. And we'll continue to fight and always support Canadians and support taxpayers to ensure that they who need opportunity to work with government have that opportunity, but not abuse it. And we recognize the members opposite would agree, as long as they also don't abuse the system. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Area Springwater, Oro Medonte.
After 9 years, the NDP Liberals are not worth the crime. Canadians recently learned that Paul Bernardo, the vile serial killer and rapist, is scheduled for his 3rd parole hearing later this month. This comes after the Liberal government allowed him to be transferred to a medium security prison. These parole hearings are deeply re-traumatizing to the French and Mahaffey families who need to travel far away from their homes to provide victim impact statements every 2 years, despite the fact that this monster is serving an indeterminate sentence. Will the Prime Minister finally stand up for victims and assure Canadians that Paul Bernardo will remain behind bars where he belongs for the rest of his life?
Hear, hear.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Madam Speaker, the Minister yesterday said words that I think are important for all members in this House, not to repeat the words of a killer. Obviously, we agree that public safety is number one in this country. As the Honourable Member knows, the Parole Board is independent, but obviously public safety will be taken into account as they make their decision, and we trust that they'll make the right decision.
The Honourable Member for Lanark, Frontenac, Kingston.
Madam Speaker, the Information Commissioner has forced the Public Safety Minister to release previously redacted briefing notes from 2018 that reveal that Corrections Canada recommended against opening the Kingston prison farms because they would not enhance the likelihood of post-incarceration employment, not reduce recidivism, cost millions of dollars to operate, and make public safety results worse. Why did the government ignore this evidence-based advice? And why did they try to keep the advice secret for so long?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Madam Speaker, obviously the Minister is not involved in the day-to-day operations of our correctional services, but I'm surprised to hear the member be so against prison farms. I too am a member of Eastern Ontario, my community, and I'm far, far east in Ontario, and I can rest assured that I was approached by farmers to say that this program was important. So I don't know where the member is coming from on this particular issue, but the community is supportive.
The Honourable for Lanark, Frontenac, Kingston.
Coming from the documents that were withheld from all of us for 6 years. Madam Speaker, on October the 15th, Corrections Canada closed the bidding in what it characterized as an, quote, invitation to submit an expression of interest to operate a commercial activity from a building located at Joyceville Institution and provide offender employment and vocational training, end quote. Now, I think this refers to the on-site slaughter facility, but the wording of the invitation is so vague that neither the building nor the nature of the employment is specified. Presumably, this was done to subvert the tender process so that only the preferred candidate can submit a bid and therefore get the contract. Will the Minister advise the House as to the outcome of the bidding process and as to whether a contract has been awarded?
Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Yeah, Madam Speaker, obviously ministers are not involved in procurement processes, but what I can do is work with the Honourable Member, and the Minister can come back to him with a more precise answer. As he well knows, ministers and politicians don't get involved in RFP processes.